In the past 2 years, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed have been making very strong remarks about his country's need to access the Red Sea, and to be specific about the port of Asseb, the Eritrean port of Asseb, which is by the Red Sea. Now, if you look at the trend for the last couple of years, the way he's been communicating, there's been a lot of mixed messages, double talks, and it's intentional. And to mention a few, what he says to his home audience in Amharic versus what is released to the international community, there's a double talk there. Literally what he says in Amharic versus English. More importantly, his message about, on one hand, he talks about diplomacy and peace, while in the same breath, the same speech, he would talk about war and the threat of war. So he's been sending a lot of mixed messages, and the intention is to confuse. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And hopefully, those of you who are don't necessarily understand Amharic or Tigrinya would better understand what all this conflict is about and how things are shaping so far. Welcome to the program. Now, why is this important? It's not about one leader or one person in the way he communicates or whether we should give that a weight or not. It's actually larger than that. Of course, we are talking about the matter of peace and war, but not only between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but for the whole region, because it has implications everywhere to the larger Horn of Africa. And because we are talking about the volatile region of the Red Sea, we are talking about regional peace, international trade, and it could actually influence and bring in a lot of countries from the neighborhood and other powers as well. So the implications are actually bigger. And to be specific, what he's saying, if we don't understand what he's talking about and let him slide toward war, this could have ramifications for the region. So let's get into that. Here is the real question. Can you talk about peace, or can you talk about war and call it diplomacy? Can you threaten war and call it peaceful? So all this double talk, it has a purpose, and like I said, it's to create some kind of narrative where, on one hand, at least to the global audience, Abiy Ahmed has been trying to send this message that Ethiopia is a very peaceful country and it's just asking things that are legal, that are based on economic access, and so on, or trade. That's the kind of message he's been sending internationally. And on the domestic front, he's been trying to make himself in Ethiopia look strong. And by that, we're going to reclaim Eritrea, and whatever was lost, we will get it back. And in that regard, he's just totally dismissing the independence and the sovereignty of Eritrea by making a claim that Asseb belongs to Ethiopia. He's essentially saying Eritrea belongs to Ethiopia, and that was basically the genesis of the war that lasted for 30 years, which ended with, once again, Eritrea being independent. So he's trying to take us back to that. But that's his domestic message. And let's take a look at a few headlines from the last couple of weeks, just to illustrate that point. For example, about a couple of weeks ago, Ethiopia actually sent a letter to the United Nations, to the UN, and it claimed that Ethiopia claimed Eritrea is ready to wage war. Now, mind you, for the last couple of years, he's been making all these claims, whereas on the flip side, Eritrea has been very quiet and peaceful. But at the same time, he's been kind of, on one hand, claiming that Eritrea is getting ready for war. Ready for war for what? On what basis? If his claim is that because I'm threatening Eritrea so much, the Eritreans are getting ready, even though there's been no such propaganda or waging for war. I mean, the only message from Eritrea so far has been just to take it easy, to stay away from this unnecessary rhetoric, because I think Eritreans and its leadership, for the most part, understand what Abiy is trying to do. On the domestic front, he's trying to look tough and kind of make people forget all this domestic chaos that he has. A lot of civil war all over the country, north, south, east, west, everywhere. So, and this is kind of a tried and true method that Ethiopian leaders do. They think the way to focus Ethiopians, their domestic issues, is to raise, past glories and history, and the Red Sea is kind of an easy sell. At least they think that, even though it's been very, very costly to them. So again, let's move on to the next headline to make that point. And when we take a look at this one, it says, Ethiopian Prime Minister says the Red Sea loss was illegal. Again, what he is saying is actually terrible, because Red Sea loss, what he's saying Red Sea loss was Eritrea's independence was illegal. First of all, it's very illegal. What he is saying, what Ethiopia tried to do years ago, what Ethiopia might try to do now, is of course illegal. But he's saying it lost it through. When he's talking about illegal, what laws is he talking about? And by the way, here's another double talk to his domestic audience, to his parliament. He basically says it violated some kind of Ethiopia's laws, which is ridiculous. And he's looking for some technicality and documentation and how Eritrea came to be. And so there is that ridiculous message on the domestic side. And whatever the narrative that he's trying to send through PR is that Red Sea was lost illegal. I don't know what he means by that. But at the same time, he calls for diplomacy with Eritrea. You can't say Eritrea's existence is illegal and at the same time say we want diplomacy with Eritrea. First thing and foremost is you respect the sovereignty and not only independence, its history. You recognize the truth. You recognize the voice of the Eritrean people, their struggle, their referendum, their internationally supervised, which was actually fair and square and with a lot of international witnesses, including the United Nations, including the United States and the European Union, the African, witnesses from everywhere, including the Ethiopian government. They saw the free and fair election that was conducted in Eritrea. But anyway, he's calling that illegal, but at the same time, he wants diplomacy. He knows this is double talk. He knows what Eritrea's reaction to this will be. But he is hoping that the international community would look at him as a peaceful guy. After all, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, even though he ended up killing hundreds of thousands of his own people. And at the same time, he's threatening regional war right now. So there is that part. And then let's continue with this headline. And this one says, Ethiopia seeks mediation to ease escalating rifts with Eritrea. Now he is trying to internationalize the issue, because he has this domestic issue. Of course, he's targeting Eritrea. And at the same time, to the international community, as I mentioned before, he is talking about all we are doing is mediation. Mediation for what? Because he made some ridiculous claim. That's like some robber coming to your house, somebody trying to steal, and says, "Well, I want to get in that house and steal something. Now, I don't want to cause harm. Can we mediate?" That's what he's basically saying. Can we negotiate? He's thinking that by being street smart about this, that I think he can fool everyone. And that's what the unpacking is all about. One more of this. Again, this was from a few days ago. Ethiopia calls for international mediation with Eritrea over Red Sea access. That's where we are going now. Now, to someone who just reads the headlines and thinks like, okay, Eritrea has been this small, least understood country, and this peaceful Ethiopia is now trying to access the Red Sea, and why won't they let them? But plus, after all, they're talking about mediation. That's just fine, but if one doesn't take the time to see what is he actually trying to do, if he's claiming that Eritrea's independence is illegal, if he's claiming things that don't belong to him, and if he's also at the same time threatening war, if he is talking about peace on one hand, diplomacy on the other, but at the same time trying to create some kind of confusion. Let's not fall in that trap. For us in the region, including Ethiopians and Eritreans, it's quite clear. But this message is actually maybe for some Ethiopians who innocently look at this and say, "Well, what's wrong with what he's asking for?" And also for the larger community, international community, or people who are not too close to the politics of the Horn of Africa, or at least Ethiopia and Eritrea, to understand it a little better. That's one of my goals here. Let's proceed. Now, let's take a look at why this is important. I mean, why this goes beyond Ethiopia and Eritrea, and not only for the region, but globally as well. The Red Sea is obviously between the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean, and Egypt side, you have the Suez Canal, and then you have obviously the Red Sea, and then that choke point that everybody's been talking about, the Bab-el-Mandeb, between Africa and Asia, between Yemen and Eritrea, Yemen on the other side, on the Arab side, Djibouti and Eritrea on the African side, and that's where the port of Asseb is. Now, this little country, Djibouti, has been key for all this. For the last 35 years for Ethiopia. Once Eritrea became independent, and then because the Ethiopians refused, they do not want to use the port of Asseb, and it's actually on purpose. The idea was to basically economically hurt Eritrea, collapse it, and hoping that once the economically collapsed country, they would either invade it again or hope that it would come back to them. That's been their strategy, a failed strategy for the last 3 decades. And what Abiy Ahmed has been kind of to pivot from that, but at the same time, he's actually trying to make it worse. So, but bottom line, the port of Djibouti is what Ethiopia has been accessing for the most part. They say over 90% of their via sea has been coming through the port of Djibouti, and that's been well and good. But if their economy grows and if they want to use more ports, obviously Djibouti has offered them other access. They also have access via Somalia, Kenya, Sudan, if they want to, including Eritrea. They have a lot of peaceful options, and all they have to do is just make a normal, peaceful, without ulterior motives, and there wouldn't be any problem. Now, what is Abiy trying to do at this point is not only to access the high seas. I mean, all countries, landlocked countries, as we know, even though this doesn't directly apply to Eritrea or what Ethiopia is saying, but if Ethiopia wants actually access to international waters, first of all, they were free to use the port as for trade and for good purpose. That was always open to them. But at this time, speaking of the double talks that Abiy Ahmed has been doing, it's a few things. First of all, he's not recognizing, by claiming that his loss was illegal, he's discounting Eritrea's independence. At the same time, he wants a sovereign port, not to use the port using agreements, but to basically own the port, which is ridiculous, because why would any country let another neighboring country and say, oh, you can come in and own a piece of land and a piece of port and keep it for yourself, because that's never going to happen. And third, and even worse, he actually wants to not only use it for trade, but to have a naval force there as well. So, and Ethiopia, which has basically been an empire, who have invaded Eritrea and tried to conquer it for 30 years, which caused unthinkable damage. We can say on both sides, but mostly on the Eritrean side, is now once again wants to come in and actually arm itself on Eritrean waters and have a say, basically. Anyway, but again, we're talking about the bigger ramifications. But what makes this an international issue, a regional issue, international issue, is if, let's say, somehow that happens and Ethiopia actually has a say over the traffic that goes back and forth. And I think Abiy Ahmed kind of a narrow-minded agenda is to have an influence over the Suez Canal, because you actually have to go through that narrow strait of Bab-el-Mandeb for ships to go north to Egypt, to the Suez Canal. And, this topic is larger than what we are talking about today, because it involves the GERD, the Nile waters and how they share it and so on. But he's trying to maneuver his way into basically blackmail Egypt to say, if you want to, we can create chaos here and create more problems for you. So that's also what he's trying to say. But again, it's not coming out clearly. It's coming out as Ethiopia wants a peaceful access. Ethiopia wants mediation. Ethiopia wants peace. But that's been the cause. Otherwise, by the way, all he has to do is there's no need for this rhetoric and disturbing the peace for not only for Ethiopians and Eritreans, but for the entire region and global ramifications. All he has to do is go to the United Nations and basically make a legal claim over that, because that's what nations do. And he's choosing not to do that because he knows that he has no basis for that. Given that, I think the world should not dismiss it, or those who claim to have relations with Ethiopia, they should advise him to back off from this, because all he's doing is creating more problems in this very problem-ridden region of the world. We are talking about Yemen, which also affects the Middle East and Israel and Palestine. There's enough conflict in this region, including what's going on in Sudan and Somalia, and told to back off. If somebody doesn't advise him, they're like, there is a better way. I think he can cause more damage before he's actually defeated. Let's move on. As I mentioned, Abiy Ahmed's primary audience has been actually the Ethiopian people. He's trying to show them that he's a tough guy who is going to glorify them, bring glory to Ethiopia, and be this historic figure who has gotten them that. But so his main audience is that. But at the same time, he knows, it affects everyone in the region. So, but what he's playing actually is he's playing with fire, because the rhetoric in Ethiopia is this nationalism of ownership of everything belongs to us anyway. We don't have to negotiate. So that's where the threat of war comes in. And for the most part, most Ethiopians accept Eritrea's independence. They respect that, even if it wasn't their wish. They respect the reality, and they know that in order to have peace, you have to do peaceful things. And there hasn't been like a kind of a bottom-up rhetoric or a bottom-up push towards this. It's all top-down, which means it's actually the prime minister and his government encouraging the Ethiopian people to think of Eritrea's independence as a loss, as something that belonged to them that was lost somehow illegally, or they were cheated out of that. So that creates the idea is to create this sense of a frustration that they have lost something, and then he will ask them, of course, to pay price to get that back. Which means usually it means in blood. He is equating it, especially when he speaks in Amharic, that what Ethiopia has lost is the right to breathe, to use its lungs. And then along with that part of the double talk, he talks about, now that Ethiopia's population is over 100 million, it's time that it breathes, as if before 100 million, it's okay not to breathe somehow. It's creating a sense of jingoism. It's a sense of toxic nationalism about the port of Asseb and Eritrea and Ethiopia's glory, Ethiopia's past. He talks about 3,000 history and to a 500-year history, a lot of myth that doesn't even make sense. He talks about this spirituality of connecting basically the river, the Nile River, to the Red Sea. And he has his ridiculous way of connecting how the two should be connected. But at the end of the day, because according to him, the tributaries, the waters, the rivers that originate in the highlands of Ethiopia, they basically feed the Nile River, and the Nile River goes all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, and somehow the Mediterranean Sea is connected to the Red Sea. So therefore, through some kind of magic, the port of Asseb belongs to Ethiopia. And that's what his claim. And it sounds ridiculous, it sounds funny, but this creates a sense of it's only a matter of faith before that what they deserve comes back to them. So he's really been playing with fire. But remember, his primary audience is his domestic audience. So what has Eritrea's response has been so far? I think it's could be summed up as quite measured. It's not total silence. The Eritrea has been responding to the claims, the letter to the United Nations, and PR news items that has been generating. I think Eritrea has been given a response, but overall it's been very measured, very articulate, and the idea is not to give it the escalation that Abiy Ahmed is looking for. I think what he's looking for is to create the same sense of rhetoric on the Eritrean side, so the Ethiopians also feel like, oh my God, war is inevitable, so we better arm ourselves, or to increase the temperature and the hatred and the conflict, the drumbeat towards war. So on the flip side, on the Eritrean side, it's been very measured. As a matter of fact, during one of his interviews, Eritrea's president, Isaias Afwerki, has basically said, he put it in a couple of words, which simply translates to, I don't know, chill, or back off, or don't do something that you're not able to carry. There are wiser and better alternatives, and so on. And why is that? I think Eritreans at large and its leadership, they do understand what Abiy Ahmed is trying to do, even though they know how dangerous it is. But at the same time, they also understand Ethiopia's internal conflict, and they understand the why behind it. But at the same time, when you're an enemy, and which has a history of violence, and especially for Eritrea, it's been kind of a terrible relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea for the last, we could say, 60 plus years. It's been so far very measured, because in the entire region, Eritrea has stability, it has peace. There is no any internal conflict. On the other side, there's a lot of chaos going on, not only in Ethiopia but also in the region, which could be summed up to take a look at this one. Because Eritrea is stable and also very cautious, it could actually do more in terms of response if we're going to have rhetoric for rhetoric on what Abiy Ahmed is saying. At the same time, Ethiopia has been, a lot of things related to the economy. There's a lot of economic pressure, but a lot of ethnic conflict within Ethiopia as well, which probably have something to do with the economic pressure, being able to create jobs and inflation and what have you. And historically, especially leaders in Ethiopia has found Eritrea to be their favorite scapegoat, and they keep mentioning the Red Sea, hoping that people would move away from other pressures. But more importantly, for the entire region, for the Horn of Africa, because Sudan is in civil war, Somalia is not stable. On the other side of the Red Sea, we have Yemen, which is not stable enough, and there's been wars going on. Ethiopia just only recently came out of the civil war in Tigray, the Tigray war, which was very, very costly. So the last thing the Horn of Africa, the last thing the region needs is another war. And it simply can't afford another conflict, which will drag it, a lot of opportunity, a lot of economic damage, a lot of loss of lives, and so on. And for what? Because some irresponsible leader wants to glorify himself, to shift people away from domestic issues, somehow to make himself like a historic figure, which is so 18th, 19th century, and it simply doesn't belong in this century. So as we wrap up, let's once again remember that about 10% of the global trade goes through the Red Sea, and we saw the ramifications of that, during the Houthi conflict. If what Ethiopia is trying to do actually transpires, it would actually make it 10 times worse, because now we are talking about a conflict that could pull in a lot of other regional powers with conflict of interests. not to mention a lot of superpowers who have base in the country of Djibouti that may drag them to this conflict. So definitely it needs to be resolved. It needs to be resolved peacefully, but not in the way that Abiy Ahmed is hoping to do, to somehow negotiate about the ownership of Eritrea per se, but he's talking about the port of Asseb. That's not negotiable. Like a lot of Eritreans have been saying, not now, not in a million years. But to actually use some other leverage that other countries have over Ethiopia and to tell him to back off, make the things that are already bad worse, to seek some peaceful, legal, more importantly, honest way of resolving this conflict would go a long way. Now, what's the final takeaway from here? It's basically this: respect borders, choose reason over rhetoric. To respect borders means to respect international agreements. The irony is that Ethiopia is actually the seat of the Addis Ababa is where the African Union sits. Main pillar of what makes the African Union is respecting borders, respecting international borders, respecting borders, even those borders as they refer to the colonial borders. Because the minute you mess with that, there is no Africa. The minute you mess with that, you are creating conflicts everywhere. As a matter of fact, if every claim and something based on ridiculous ethnic nationalism could create countries around Africa, we would have, some say, over 500 countries, even 3,000 countries. Now, Ethiopia, who actually houses the African Union, its leader, when he's talking about this, so far, surprisingly, the African Union has been silent. Maybe they don't want to make things worse. But what he's saying is basically shredding the African Union Charter. And then there's, of course, the bigger Charter of the United Nations, because this applies everywhere. It's not about colonial borders. It's basically about international borders, about the international norm. If bigger population countries simply can come over and take over and invade smaller ones and what they perceive as weaker ones, the world will be in chaos. And weaker countries, there are no weaker countries. People will defend themselves to the fullest. So probably the beginning of the end of the world, or World War III. And we know that that's not going to happen because Abiy Ahmed does not have that kind of leverage, because nobody's going to let him. But he's like running around with fire like a very irresponsible child who basically thinks he can get away with whatever he wants. So it's about time the international community, from the United Nations to the African Union, to the European Union, to all regional unions, including IGAD, by the way, because this is exactly what they were set up to do, for them to do their job and to show him, guide him away from this fire. At the same time, those countries who have better relations with Ethiopia, this is about time they use that for peaceful purposes. And a lot of them in the Middle East and Africa and in the United States and the European Union and a lot of European countries do, and then they can do that. But the bottom line is, I don't think people have paid enough attention to it. They simply think it's a kind of a trade negotiation where Ethiopia is trying to access the Red Sea, get another port in addition to Djibouti, and he is basically talking about let's do this peacefully and let's negotiate. That is not what's going on. What's going on is the beginning of probably another 30-year war. So with that in mind, I'm thank you so much for paying attention to this matter, as they say. Thank you very much for watching this video. And if you like this analysis, please subscribe, and we will have more. I usually discuss things that matter to Eritrea. Usually that actually affects the whole region. So I appreciate your comments, and I like to hear what you think. Thank you so much.